Hey everybody, Sean from Media Assault here, and this week I'm going to be doing a review of a movie that was hugely influential on my love of movies when I was a child. The movie I'm talking about came out when I was 8 years old. It came out in 1976, so that blows away any misconceptions you may have about how old I am. If you can do the math, you can figure it out. The movie is the 1976 version of King Kong. Now, a lot of people think this movie was a financial flop, and I'm going to kind of clear up some misconceptions about this movie. Number one, the movie was not a flop. It was made for a budget of $24 million. It did go over budget. However, it made nearly $90 or $91 million in box office back in 1976. Well, mostly in 1977 because it was released in late 1976. That is hardly a flop. If your movie makes back 3 times what it cost to make it, I think you did okay. So let's talk about the actual movie. This movie stars Jeff Bridges and Charles Grodin, and it was the first movie to feature Jessica Lange in an acting role, in a prominent acting role, I suppose. And yes, it's a remake of the 1933 classic King Kong. A lot of story elements were changed for this update. Of course, the original 1933 version of King Kong featured a group of people traveling to an island to make a movie. And of course, there was an actress, Fay Wray, and King Kong became enamored with her, and one thing led to another, and King Kong is killed at the top of a tall building in New York. The same basic principle is taking place in this version, however, it's been updated for the 70s. Of course, in the mid-1970s, there was a middle of the energy crisis, so instead of there being a film crew, we have Charles Grodin playing Fred Wilson, leading a team of explorers from a company called Petrox to find oil on Skull Island. Jeff Bridges plays Jack Prescott, who is a paleontologist, I believe, and he stows away on the Petrox Explorer, which is the ship that Fred Wilson is taking to Skull Island to find the oil. And he stows away on board to see why they're going there, because he has heard of legends that there is a giant primate living on the island, and he sees this expedition as his chance to get to that island to study what's ever there. He's caught as a stowaway on the ship, but then he is eventually made the expedition photographer for the journey. While they're traveling to the island, they pick up a mayday signal from a yacht which has exploded, and they eventually find drifting in the open waters of the Pacific a life raft, and in that life raft is a woman named Dwan, played by Jessica Lange. She was supposedly on her way to Hong Kong to appear in a movie, but the yacht exploded and she's the only survivor. Lucky her, she gets picked up and she's on her way to Skull Island. So of course they arrive at the island and they find that there is a large wall on the island built by some natives who are still there. The island is thought to be uninhabited, but of course it's quickly discovered that it is not. Of course, there's this huge wall protecting the natives from this god, Kong, who of course is the giant ape. If I have to explain the rest of the story to you, I'm not going to fill in all the blanks. There are a lot of differences between this movie and the 1933 version, and of course there are some differences between this movie and the 2005 remake, which is more faithful to the original 1933 version than this one is. This is a film that I enjoy, despite the fact that I would be the first person to admit that there's a lot of bad stuff going on here. One of the things that was highly publicized about this film back in 1976 was the fact that the special effects wizards that Dino De Laurentiis, the producer, had put together the team of special effects people that he put together created this 40-foot giant remote-controlled robot that was going to portray Kong on film. And even as an 8-year-old kid sitting there watching this movie, I believed that there was a 40-foot tall giant robot doing all the Kong stuff in this movie. I've since, of course, seen this movie several times since then and realized that I must have been completely oblivious to the fact that no robot then or now could do what was supposedly being done by a robot on screen. They kind of kept that illusion up even after the film's release, but of course it was eventually revealed that Rick Baker did a lot of the movie's special effects work in basically an ape suit. And of course, watching the film now as an adult, it's hard to believe that I ever thought that this was a robot. It's so obviously a guy in a suit most of the time, to the point where when Kong roars and tilts his head back, you can actually see the teeth of the actor playing Kong behind the teeth of the Kong costume. Despite all that, I love this movie, and it's mainly probably for nostalgic reasons. I can't really chalk it up to anything other than that. Admittedly, it's a pretty bad film on many levels, but as a movie for an 8-year-old, you know, looking back, how could I not love it? Of course, I hadn't seen Star Wars, or I hadn't seen anything made after Star Wars when this came out. And I think Star Wars spoiled a lot of people in terms of what to expect in terms of special effects. And this movie back then was hitting on all cylinders as far as I was concerned. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fantastic. I went to the movies again and again and again to see this. Now, of course, you have to remember this came out before home video. You couldn't just pop in a videotape or a DVD and watch it whenever you wanted. You had to wait for it to come back to the theater. And this movie was held over, and that's something you don't really see in movie advertising in the newspaper anymore. Of course, who looks in the newspaper for movie showtimes anymore either? But back then, you would open up the entertainment section of the newspaper and you'd look and you'd see, okay, what's playing Friday? And it'd be King Kong held over 42nd week. I mean, this movie played forever, so that's why I found it kind of hard to believe that anybody would think that this movie was a financial failure. 42 weeks in a row at the theater, I think it's doing okay. I've always been a King Kong fan. A lot of people look down on this film. Maybe it's warranted, maybe it's not, but I still think it's worth seeing. So, admittedly, not the greatest movie in the world. I would give it, personally, I would rate it like an 8 out of 10. But if I were seeing this through the eyes of somebody who doesn't have the type of memories about it that I do, I'd probably rate it a 6 out of 10. Special effects are not that great. You do get to see the 40-foot robot on screen for about a minute, and if you can't tell the difference between the 40-foot robot and the Rick Baker footage, you're an idiot, because the 40-foot robot stands in one place and looks like it's made out of stone. It just sort of stares off into the distance and looks completely lifeless, whereas the Rick Baker footage, of course, he's very animated and full of life, I guess. And I'm going to share an image with you. One of the things that people may remember about this film is this sort of iconic image from the film, or that was used to promote the film. This appeared on t-shirts, this appeared on glasses, posters, whatever. King Kong straddling the World Trade Center. Of course, at the end of the film, he does not climb the Empire State Building in this movie. He climbs the World Trade Center, which of course horribly dates the movie now because that's kind of impossible. And this comes from this book, which if you're a King Kong fan, I highly recommend. This is King Kong, The History of a Movie Icon, from Fay Wray to Peter Jackson by Ray Morton. I highly recommend picking up this book if you have any interest in King Kong whatsoever. So, I'm totally rambling, but that's probably going to happen a lot when I talk about this movie. All I can say is if you haven't seen it, give it a shot and try to enjoy it through the eyes of an 8-year-old boy living in 1976 in Pennsylvania, because that's what I did. So, thanks for letting me ramble on about one of my favorite movies. Thanks for watching, and subscribe. and watch some of my other reviews anytime you want here on YouTube, because that's the magic of the internet. Something they didn't have in 1976. See you later.